The senior lawyer says there's credible evidence that the Defence Force covered up civilian deaths at the hands of the country's elite soldiers. Lawyers Rodney Harrison QC, Deborah Manning and Richard McLeod today called for an independent inquiry into New Zealand's SAS troop involvement in a 2010 raid in Afghanistan. Our reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
The Defence Force says allegations of civilian deaths are unfounded, but that's been contradicted by a new book by investigative journalists John Stevenson and Nikki Hager. Their book, Hit and Run, accuses the SAS of leading the attack, which killed 6 civilians and left 15 injured. Lawyer Deborah Manning says she's spoken to people from the villages at the centre of the raids.
The villagers have been wanting help about what's happened because, of course, this has had a huge impact upon them to this day. Many are disabled and, of course, heavily traumatised, particularly the parents of little Fatima, the 3-year-old girl.
Fatima is said to be one of the victims. Miss Manning's colleague Rodney Harrison QC said New Zealand has a legal obligation to launch the inquiry.
The inquiry also has to look at the cover-up, to be blunt, by the New Zealand Defence Force, the complete denial that there were any civilian deaths and the assertion that in fact surgeons were killed when none were killed.
In 2011, the New Zealand Defence Force said the attacks were investigated by a joint Afghan Ministry of Defence, Ministry of Interior and International Security Assistance Force assessment team that concluded there were no civilian deaths. They stand by that claim. But Mr Harrison said that position was no longer credible.
From our perspective, there's both the book and the instructions we have from the villagers, and we're relying on those. But already the outright denials of the Defence Force have been disproved over the last couple of days anyway, so it's not as if any credence should be given to those.
He said the military's investigation had a fundamental flaw.
The villagers were never interviewed or even approached for any of the so-called investigations that have occurred thus far. Their side has not been heard. It can and should now be heard.
Mr Harrison said the New Zealand public's been misled by the Defence Force and the inquiry needs to find out why. Otago University law professor Andrew Geddes says if the government declines to launch the inquiry, the next step could be to head to the International Criminal Court. And there's precedent for that.
There's been cases brought in the United Kingdom under the European Convention of Human Rights for actions that British soldiers took in Iraq, where it was alleged that the soldiers had been complicit in torture and so on, and the British court said, yes, those are cases that we can hear and we can take action.
Professor Geddes said if mistakes were made, then it's important New Zealand learns the lessons.
We do trust our soldiers with a lot of freedom overseas, and we allow the SAS to operate in the shadows to some extent because we trust them to do the right thing. If it turns out they're not telling us the truth about what they're doing, that raises all sorts of questions about whether that trust is justified. So it is very important for the SAS as an organisation to have this cleared up, because otherwise this is going to be a stain on their name for the rest of their history.
He said the New Zealand public deserved to know what happened and should have been told 7 years ago when the raids happened.
We can't allow the Defence Forces to go on saying there's nothing to see here, nothing went wrong, no one died, when there's the amount of evidence that's now on the table that points in the opposite direction. You know, what sort of country are we if we just shrug our shoulders and go, oh, well, you know, goodness knows what happened here. You know, this was done in our name. We have to care.
The Prime Minister, Bill English, says he'll be meeting with the Defence Minister, Jerry Brownlee, and the Chief of the Defence Force on Sunday to discuss the claims. RNZ requested an interview with the Defence Force, but they declined. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gay aho.